Manchurian Candidate is an American film from 1962 that reflects back on the phenomenon of McCarthyism, which had embroiled the nation less than a decade before. But by 1962, it was over. Joe McCarthy was a U.S. senator whose habit was to accuse U.S. government agencies, such as the Army and the State Department, of being infiltrated by communist spies. While a few spies were indeed found, McCarthy's reckless accusations of long lists of U.S. government workers who were supposedly working for the Soviet Union led to a serious restriction on basic civil rights for U.S. citizens and caused many people to lose their livelihood. This movie is about the anti-communist paranoia of the late 1940s and 1950s. The movie works on two levels. The most basic level, it's simply a political thriller in which the hero, Major Marco, overcomes his own brainwashing and saves the day by identifying and neutralizing a spy who wants to kill a presidential candidate. So you can enjoy it as a political thriller if you want. For more perceptive viewers, this film is also a satire of McCarthyism, and it's a critique of the paranoid style of politics. We usually think of the word satire as implying a comedy, but this film is obviously not a comedy. The satire makes the paranoid politicians look ridiculous, but really more frightening than amusing. Occasionally, the film's critique is heavy-handed. For example, Abraham Lincoln appears many times in the movie as a painting hanging over Johnny Iceland's head, as a sculpture bust in Iceland's office, as you can see on my screen here. And Iceland even dresses up as Lincoln for a cocktail party. This constant linking of Iceland to Lincoln seems to be a clear attempt by the movie to link Iceland to the Republican Party. While Joe McCarthy was a Republican, it seems to me distracting for the film to emphasize that. The paranoid style of politics is compatible with a variety of different political ideologies, and we can easily identify both right-wing and left-wing totalitarian dictatorships in recent history. There are some other artistic missteps in the movie. For example, in this film, the romance between Major Marco and Rosie does not really work. In the pickup scene on the train, Rosie is attempting witty banter while Marco stands there having a panic attack. It's not clear why she is throwing herself at him. Perhaps it's intended to be in the style of the train pickup scene in Hitchcock's North by Northwest. The second time that Rosie sees Marco in the police station, she has already dumped her fiancé for him. On their third encounter, he asks her to marry him out of nowhere, and she is all for it. Now, perhaps the filmmakers never doubted that the audience in 1962 would accept that any woman would, of course, want to hit on a huge star like Frank Sinatra and marry him, even if he's a total wreck. But to me, Rosie's unexplained attraction to Marco and all the weird banter almost makes it seem like she may be a communist controller attempting to manipulate the brainwashed Marco. Sometimes when artists make a mistake, it actually makes the work more interesting. Here, all the scenes between Marco and Rosie seem strained and unreal, which is probably due to weak filmmaking. But the artistic misstep creates the happy accident of sustaining and feeding the film's atmosphere of unease and paranoia. It actually works in the film's favor that the romance seems so bizarre, because the entire film is supposed to be bizarre and unsettling. In other scenes, the movie is astonishingly inventive. Probably the best sequence in the movie is the women's garden club scene in the first act. It begins with the camera right in the center of the action, and we do a slow 360-degree pan all around the scene. We see the garden club ladies and the brainwashed soldiers. After the first 360-degree pan, the camera continues with a second 360-degree pan, but this time we see the communist operatives instead of the garden club ladies. This sequence is incredibly weird and inventive. It's simultaneously satirical and unsettling. It's almost like a meeting of James Bond villains, except that the Bond movies were not yet part of the culture when this movie was made. This fantastic sequence does double duty. It satirizes the paranoid viewpoint while at the same time moving the thriller plot forward. So here again, the movie is working on two levels. Did you notice that when the black soldier is having his bad dream later in the movie, all the garden club ladies were black? This is a good example of how art reflects society and culture. In 1962, desegregation was just getting started, and the ladies' gardens clubs would have been almost all segregated by race. This film reflects that reality without really commenting on it. Another inventive use of camera work is this scene. It happens when Johnny Iceland crashes a government hearing to announce that he's uncovered communist infiltration. This has been orchestrated by Eleanor so that Johnny can get media attention. There's this fabulous deep focus shot that I'm showing on my screen now with 3 layers. The actual action of Johnny's announcement in the background. Well, actually in the deep background, you see the TV camera. In the middle background, you see Johnny making his announcement. In the middle foreground, you see how his announcement is being portrayed on TV. And then in the very foreground, you see Eleanor evaluating the scene. And of course, Eleanor is his handler. So it's a great visual representation of all the things that are going on, multiple things happening at the same time. The plot's big reveal in the third act is that Raymond Shaw's mother, Eleanor Iceland, is actually a communist agent. There is some foreshadowing of this reveal. For example, the thing that triggers Shaw into his hypnotic state is a playing card, the Red Queen. And then it turns out that the Queen Bee character in the movie, who wants to be Queen of the United States, is actually a red. Of course, red was a slang term for communist back then. So Eleanor turns out to have been her son's communist controller all along, his Red Queen. Another scene that foreshadowed this big reveal was when Senator Jordan told Eleanor that Icelandism was doing more damage to the country than communism was. Senator Jordan's comment to Eleanor was a close paraphrase of something that real-life Senator Flanders said of Joe McCarthy. He said, "Were the junior senator from Wisconsin in the pay of communists, he could not have done a better job for them." This shows a nice link between society and art, as a comment from a real-life senator becomes the inspiration for the central plot point in this fictional movie. Of course, in the movie, unlike real life, it turns out that the person at the core of the anti-communist movement actually is a communist herself and is using anti-communism to destroy the country. Paranoid concerns over an internal enemy who is hiding in plain sight among us were not unique to the McCarthy era. In the 1950s, some people were paranoid about communist spies. Today, we still have politicians engaging in the paranoid style. Even today, President-elect Trump's nominee for National Security Advisor has gone on record believing that Bill and Hillary Clinton are part of a pedophile gang that is headquartered in a DC pizza restaurant. He also believes that there are signs in Arabic along the US-Mexico border that tell Islamic terrorists where to cross the border. While such beliefs may seem ludicrous to those of us in the evidence-based community, it's clear that some individuals with a great deal of political power actually are capable of such paranoid thinking today, just as they were back in the 1950s. Now, of course, concerns over Russian spying were valid in the 1950s and remain valid today, obviously, just as concerns over domestic terrorism are valid today. But the movie wants to argue that an extremist, paranoid response to these valid concerns is in itself a problem. The Manchurian Candidate portrays a world in which excessive paranoia over the problem of aliens hiding among us leads to dysfunctional politics and to the abuse of innocent victims of paranoid politicians. It is clear that the filmmakers see political paranoia as potentially a worse problem than whatever it is that is making us paranoid. Paranoia itself is a bigger concern than a few spies or a few terrorists. The danger of political paranoia is that it winds up restricting everyone's freedom in the name of combating a few isolated incidents here and there. Clearly, the film's satire and critique of political paranoia is still relevant even today.